Jake Reynolds grabbed her arm and yanked her off the stool. "Nobody asked you to sit here, sweetheart." She didn't resist, didn't cry out, didn't even blink. She simply looked down at his hand on her arm, the way a surgeon looks at a problem before deciding exactly how to fix it. The entire bar watched him humiliate a tired woman in a gray shirt. They laughed. Every single one of them laughed. And Jake Reynolds decorated Navy SEAL 11 combat deployments. 32 confirmed had absolutely no idea that the woman he just put his hands on had a kill record that would make his go pale. Her call sign was Viper 1, and she had been very, very patient tonight. Hit subscribe, drop your city below. You will not want to miss where this goes. The night started the way most Friday nights started at the Anchor. Loud, crowded, full of men who had been places most people never heard of and done things most people would never believe. The Anchor sat 3 blocks from the naval base in San Diego, and it had been the unofficial gathering spot for operators, veterans, and retired Special Forces personnel for going on 22 years. The walls were covered in patches, photographs, and handwritten notes from units that had cycled through. The bartender, a retired Navy corpsman named Sal, had heard enough classified information over the years to probably start a very dangerous podcast. He kept his mouth shut and poured heavy, which was exactly why people kept coming back. By 9 o'clock, the place was packed. There were 4 tables of SEALs from Team 3, 2 retired Army Rangers arguing about something near the jukebox, and a cluster of Marine Recon veterans at the far end who hadn't stopped competing with each other since 2004 and probably never would. The energy was the kind that built slowly over the first hour, the careful, cautious warmth of men who trusted each other but never fully lowered their guard, even in a safe space. That was just the nature of the job. You couldn't turn it off. Most of them had stopped trying. And then quietly, without anyone particularly noticing at first, the woman sat down at the end of the bar. She had come in through the side door, the one that most people didn't know was unlocked on Friday nights, because the fire exit alarm had been broken for 3 years and Sal was too cheap to fix it. She moved without sound, not the dramatic, theatrical silence of someone trying to be mysterious. More like the natural quiet of someone who had spent so long being careful about how much space she took up that it had become reflex. She didn't scan the room the way a nervous civilian would. She didn't look around at all, not in any obvious way. But she knew exactly how many people were in that building. She knew there were 2 exits she could reach in under 8 seconds. She knew the man in the corner booth near the jukebox was left-handed because of which hand he held his glass with. She knew the table of SEALs by the pool table was loud but not dangerous. The particular quality of their laughter was competitive, not aggressive. She processed all of this without moving her eyes. Her name, the name on her hospital badge, the name on her lease, the name on her car insurance was Emily Carter, 34 years old, emergency room nurse at San Diego Harbor Medical Center. She had just finished a 14-hour shift that included 2 trauma cases, 1 cardiac arrest, a teenager who had taken something he shouldn't have, and a very unfortunate incident involving a ceiling fan and a man who really should have known better. She was tired in the particular way that nurses get tired, not sleepy, exactly, but hollowed out. Like someone had taken the last 6 hours and scraped them along the inside of her bones. She ordered a whiskey neat, and she didn't ask for a brand. Sal poured her bullet without being told because he had seen that expression before on people who needed exactly that and nothing else. She said, "Thank you." He nodded. She looked at her phone. That was it. That was her whole presence in the room for the first 20 minutes. A tired woman at the end of the bar drinking whiskey and checking her messages. Nobody worth looking at twice, except Thomas Walker looked at her twice. Thomas Walker was 61 years old, and he had spent 30 of those years doing things he was legally prohibited from talking about in most countries. He had been a Master Chief in Naval Special Warfare. He had run operations in places that didn't appear on the official deployment lists. He was built like someone who had been built for a specific purpose and then kept in service well past the recommended lifespan with the kind of worn, deliberate stillness that came from having been in enough dangerous situations. That stillness itself had become a survival mechanism. I was sitting in the corner booth nursing a club soda. He'd been sober for 4 years, and he was watching the woman at the bar. Not the way the younger SEALs would eventually watch her, not with amusement or condescension. He was watching her the way you watch something that doesn't fit where it's placed, like a piece of a puzzle that belongs to a completely different box. There was something about the way she sat. He couldn't name it yet. It was too early and it was subtle enough that he almost dismissed it. But Thomas Walker had not survived 30 years in special operations by dismissing things that didn't add up. He kept watching. He kept his face blank. He kept his club soda at his lips so nobody could read the expression underneath. He was still watching when Jake Reynolds walked in. Lieutenant Jake Reynolds was 31 years old, and he was the kind of man who filled a room the way a sound fills a room, completely immediately, and with total confidence that everyone wanted to hear it. He was tall, broad-built, with the specific efficiency that comes from years of physical training that has a real purpose attached to it. He had a face that was used to getting what it wanted, and a laugh that assumed it was always welcome. He wasn't a bad man exactly. He was just a man who had been told he was exceptional so many times that he had stopped questioning it. He led a team. His team loved him. He had a combat record that would make most people's hands shake to read. He also had 3 drinks in him before he walked through the door, which was relevant. He came in with 6 other guys, all of them off duty, all of them loud in the particular way of men who had been coiled tight for weeks and were finally unspooling. They took up the big table in the middle of the room like they were eating a beachhead. Jackets off, orders flying at Sal before they'd even sat down. The energy of the room shifted immediately, not badly, just louder. Jake was scanning the space the way operators always scan spaces, and his eyes caught on Emily at the end of the bar. She was the thing that didn't fit. The anchor was not completely hostile to civilians. Wives and girlfriends came in sometimes, and occasionally someone wandered in off the street just looking for a bar. But there was always a particular quality to those visitors. They were aware of being in a place they didn't entirely belong. They sat forward. They watched the room with a certain eagerness or anxiety. Emily Carter was sitting the way you sit in your own kitchen. That bothered him. I didn't understand why it bothered him. He told himself it was just that she looked too comfortable. He told himself she was probably someone's girlfriend waiting for a pickup. He told himself it didn't matter. But something about her stillness was working on him in a way he couldn't articulate, and the way Jake Reynolds always dealt with things he couldn't articulate was to address them out loud. He walked over. He pulled out the stool 2 down from her, turned it around backward, and sat on it, the way young men who are used to their confidence being welcomed always sit, deliberately casual, arms over the back like the whole bar was already his. Rough night, he said. Emily glanced up from her phone. She looked at him once the way you look at something to identify it, and then she looked back at her phone. Long shift, she said. You a nurse or something? She turned her badge over on the bar. She hadn't taken it off. She'd meant to, but forgotten, and he looked at it. San Diego Harbor Medical Center. Emily Carter, RN. Huh, he said. You come in here a lot. First time. Wrong place for someone like you, he said. And he grinned, and he said it loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. Because that was the kind of man he was in those moments, performing slightly more than he was actually being. Civilians don't usually know about this place. The nearby tables caught it, and there was low laughter. Emily didn't respond. She cleaned a small beer spill off her sleeve. One of his friends had jostled the bar coming past with a napkin. Methodical, like she was charting a patient. That silence made Jake's grin go a little fixed. He was used to responses. Good or bad, flirtatious or annoyed people always responded to Jake Reynolds. She didn't. I'm Jake, he said. I know, she said. He paused. You know, your friends have said your name 4 times since you sat down. You also answered to it when Sal asked who was buying the next round. She finally looked at him again. Jake Reynolds, Team 3. You got back from a rotation about 3 weeks ago, based on the fact that you're still adjusting your sleep schedule. You keep rubbing your eyes the way people do when they're fighting time zone resets. You've had 4 drinks tonight, not 3, because you're slightly overcounting your steps the way people do in the early range of impairment. And you walked in with 6 people, but you sat over here, which means you're the kind of person who needs an audience, but also needs to be the one who made the approach. She picked up her whiskey. Nice to meet you, Jake. The stool next to Jake scraped back. His teammate, a guy named Davis, who was roughly the size of a very motivated refrigerator, had walked over and was now standing with his arms folded, looking at Emily with an expression that was trying to be amused and failing. How do you know all that? Davis said. ER nursing, Emily said simply. You read people fast or patients die. I've been doing it for 6 years. She paused. You've got an old rotator cuff injury on the right side, pre-operation. You're favoring it by about 15 degrees when you reach for things. You should get that looked at. Davis's hand dropped from where it had been resting on the bar, specifically from the position that Emily had just described. He stared at her. He didn't say anything. She's messing with us, Jake said, but his voice had lost some of its easy confidence. He was recalibrating. She could see him doing it. She probably Googled the unit before she came in. I'm an ER nurse in San Diego, Emily said pleasantly. I spend most of my time trying not to spill coffee on myself and calculating medication doses in my head. I assure you researching your unit in advance was not how I planned my Friday night. Then how? I told you, you learned to read people. She looked back at her phone. Or people you're trying to keep alive teach you. Thomas Walker in his corner booth had straightened slightly. He caught those last words. People you're trying to keep alive, not patients, not people who come in, people you're trying to keep alive. That was a very specific phrasing, the kind that came from a very specific type of experience. He kept watching. Jake wasn't done. The thing about Jake Reynolds was that he was competitive in the specific way that operators are competitive, not petty. Exactly, but incapable of walking away from something unfinished. It wasn't even about winning. It was about understanding. He needed to understand what he was looking at. You said you've dealt with worse, he said, circling back to something she'd said earlier. What's worse than a bar full of SEALs giving you a hard time? Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said combat. The word landed differently from her mouth than it would have from anyone else in the room, because every person in that bar who had heard it said in a real context recognized something in her voice, a specific lack of drama. People who had been there never said the word the way civilians said it. They said it flat like a medical term, like a thing that existed and had properties and needed to be discussed accurately. Jake's jaw tightened. You were in, I didn't say that. You implied. I said I dealt with worse. You filled in the rest. She glanced at him. That's a habit you should probably work on, filling things in. Across the room, one of the other veterans, a man named Ortega, who had done 12 years with Army Special Forces, had turned in his chair. Not aggressively, just oriented, like an antenna catching a frequency. He'd heard the word too, and he'd heard the flatness in her voice when she said it. She's been somewhere, Ortega said quietly to the man beside him. The man beside him, retired Ranger name of Briggs, just nodded once without speaking. Jake pushed his stool closer, not crowding her, just eliminating the pretense of distance. Look, he said, and his voice was different now. Lower, less, performance, more genuine. I'm not trying to mess with you. I'm just, you don't add up. Emily looked at him directly for the first time without looking away. People rarely do, she said. Will you just tell me who you are, Emily Carter? ER nurse. I already showed you my badge. That's not what I mean, and you know it. She was quiet for a long moment. The bar was loud everywhere, except right there. Right there in that small zone around the end of the counter, it had gone oddly still. Not silent, the noise of the rest of the room was still there. But the people nearby had stopped their own conversations without fully realizing they'd done it. They were listening. Thomas Walker had put down his club soda. Are you going to ask me about the exit by the kitchen? Emily said finally, and her voice was just slightly quieter, not dramatically, just the way a voice gets when it moves from public to private. Or the fact that I picked this specific stool because it gives me sight lines to both doors and the hallway, and nobody can get within 4 feet of me from behind without crossing my peripheral vision. Or are you going to ask about why I corrected myself from reactive to threat assessment when I described the table near the jukebox? She paused. Or are you just going to keep pretending you haven't already noticed all of that yourself? Jake said nothing, because she was right. He had noticed. He'd been noticing since he sat down and hadn't been able to name it, and she had just named every single thing. Davis had gone completely still beside him. From across the room, Ortega stood up, slowly, not threatening, just stood up the way you stand up when you want to see something better. And then from the corner, from his booth, in a voice that was level and careful and carried across the quiet that had formed around that part of the bar. Like a weather system, Thomas Walker said. Where did you serve? It was the first time he'd spoken, And the quality of his voice, the specific authority of it, the 30 years of weight behind it, changed the temperature of the entire conversation. Emily turned to look at him. She looked at him for a long moment. Thomas Walker looked back, and something passed between them that nobody else in the room quite understood. A recognition that skipped the steps of introduction and biography and went directly to the wordless language of people who have been in the same place, even if they've never met. Depends on who's asking, Emily said. Master Chief Thomas Walker, he said. Naval Special Warfare, retired. She held his gaze. Emily Carter, she said. And Walker said very quietly, I don't think that's the name I'd know you by. The bar had gone genuinely completely quiet. Jake looked from Walker to Emily and back again. What does that mean, he said. Walker didn't answer. He was still looking at Emily. And Emily, who had spent 6 years being Emily Carter, who had gone to work every day and treated patients and filled out charts and answered to a name that was real but was not complete. Emily was doing something she hadn't done in a very long time. She was deciding, not about whether to answer, about how much of herself to let back into the room. Because names are not the only thing about a person. Names are covers. Names are what gets printed on badges and leases and the kind of ID cards that civilians carry. But underneath names are histories. And underneath histories are the specific weight of things that happened in places that don't appear on any map you can buy at an airport. Sal came down the bar and refilled her whiskey without being asked. She hadn't asked him to. He'd just done it. She picked it up. She drank. And then Jake Reynolds, who was, for the first time all night, not performing anything, said quietly, almost like he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Come on, everyone in special operations has a call sign. He paused. So what's yours? The room waited. Emily stared at her glass. The ice had melted. The whiskey was smooth. The bar smelled like old wood and beer, and the particular combination of people who have been in close quarters with danger for so long, it never fully leaves them. She set the glass down, and she said 2 words, quietly, without drama, without performance, the way you say something that is simply and completely true. Viper 1, Jake Reynolds' bottle left his hand. Not dramatically. He didn't throw it. It simply ceased to be something he was holding. It hit the floor and glass scattered across the tile, and nobody moved. Nobody reached for napkins. Nobody said anything. Jake's face had gone a color that didn't belong on someone his age. Davis beside him took 1 step backward. From across the room, Ortega said something in Spanish that was not a profanity exactly, but was the kind of exclamation you make when the world has just rearranged itself into a shape you weren't prepared for. Briggs, the retired ranger, had sat down, heavily, like his legs had made a decision his brain hadn't caught up to yet. And Thomas Walker stood up. He did it slowly with the particular deliberateness of someone who is making a physical statement, and he stood at his full height in the corner of the bar, and he looked at the woman at the end of the counter. And for the first time in 30 years of not being shaken by anything, Thomas Walker looked shaken, because he knew that name. Han had been in a briefing room in Bagram in 2017, and that name had come up, and the room had gone quiet in the same way that rooms go quiet when something genuinely beyond the ordinary is being discussed. He had seen the file. Not all of it, most of it was above his clearance, which was itself remarkable, but enough. He had seen the operational summary. He had seen the casualty report. He had seen the line at the bottom that said, status missing, presumed. He had never expected to see the rest of that sentence disproved in a bar in San Diego. Emily Carter, he said, and his voice was barely above a whisper now. She looked at him. She didn't confirm or deny. She didn't have to. The name she'd given was the confirmation. You're supposed to be gone, Walker said. And the woman who had been called Viper 1 looked at the retired Master Chief across a bar full of people who were holding their breath and said with something that was almost not quite, but almost a smile, people keep saying that. And she picked up her whiskey, and she drank. And outside the bar, the San Diego night went on without knowing what had just happened inside it. Without knowing that a woman who had been listed in classified documents as missing, presumed dead, had just said her own name out loud in a room full of people who understood exactly what it meant. Without knowing that for Emily Carter, who had spent 6 years being only Emily Carter, only the nurse, only the woman at the end of the bar, something had just shifted. The way a door shifts when someone puts a key in it, not open yet, but no longer locked. Thomas Walker crossed the bar slowly. He sat down on the stool on her other side, not Jake's side, but the other one, and he put his hands flat on the bar and he looked straight ahead, not at her. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said. "I know," she said, "but I'd like to understand," he said, "if you're willing." She was quiet for a long moment. The bar was still holding its collective breath, but the people were smart enough to give space. The seals at the middle table had turned back to their drinks, and the conversation had resumed in a muted, careful way, like people in a library who have been reminded that other people are reading. "What do you want to understand?" Emily said. "How you're sitting here," Walker said, "ordering whiskey, working a nursing shift." He stopped himself. "After everything in the file." Emily turned her glass slowly. "Did you read the whole file?" she asked. "Not all of it. Some of it was sealed above my clearance." "The parts above your clearance," she said carefully, "are the parts that explain why I'm sitting here." Walker absorbed that. "The mission," he said. "Yes." "The extraction." "Yes." "The team." She was quiet. "Yes," she said finally, one word. But Walker heard everything in it. He had been in the business long enough to know that the people who said the least about certain things were the ones who had been closest to them. The ones who talked about it easily were the ones who'd heard about it from 2 countries away. The ones who couldn't say more than one word were the ones who'd been standing there when it happened. "I'm sorry," he said. It wasn't a military expression. It wasn't tactical or procedural. It was just the thing you said to another person when you understood that they had lost something that couldn't be replaced. Emily looked at him. For a moment, just a moment, something moved across her face that wasn't controlled or measured. Something that was purely human and purely exhausted and had been waiting behind the careful stillness for a very long time. Then it was gone. "I made a choice," she said. "I know. It was the right choice. I believe you. I'd make it again." "I believe that too." She picked up her drink. He sat beside her, and Jake Reynolds, standing a few feet away with the glass from his dropped bottle still scattered around his feet, watched the two of them and understood for the first time all night that he had no idea, had never had any idea what he was actually looking at. He reached down and started picking up the pieces of glass. Not because Sal asked him to, not because anyone was watching, because it was the only thing he could think of to do with his hands while he tried to recalibrate everything. He thought he understood about the room he was standing in and the woman at the end of the bar. And Emily Carter Viper 1 watched him do it and said nothing and drank her whiskey and waited for whatever came next. The glass pieces were still on the floor. Jake Reynolds was still picking them up one by one with hands that weren't entirely steady. The sound of each shard hitting the small pile he'd made was the only noise at that end of the bar. Everyone else was pretending to have a conversation. Nobody was actually having one. Thomas Walker hadn't moved from the stool beside Emily and sat the way men sit when they are processing something that requires the same careful attention they would give to a live ordnance situation, completely still on the outside, working very fast on the inside. His club soda was sweating onto the bar. He hadn't touched it in 4 minutes. Emily Carter had ordered a second whiskey. She hadn't asked for it. Sal had simply put it in front of her, and she had accepted it the way you accept something from someone who understands without being told. She turned the glass slowly between her palms, not drinking, just holding it. "How long?" Walker said finally. She didn't ask what he meant. 6 years, she said, give or take. San Diego the whole time. First 2 years, no, I moved around. Oregon, then New Mexico for a while. Ended up here because the hospital had an opening and I needed... She stopped. She chose the next word carefully. Stability. Walker nodded slowly. "Nobody from the community found you," he said. "People looked," she said, "early on. The first year I had to move twice." She paused. "After that, I got better at being someone else." "Emily Carter," Walker said. "Emily Carter," she confirmed. "Is that even your real name?" She looked at him. "It's my real name now," she said. "That's the only kind of real that matters." Walker absorbed that for a moment. Then Jake Reynolds straightened up from the floor, a handful of broken glass in his palm, and he looked at Emily with an expression that had nothing left of the man who had yanked her glass down in front of her face 20 minutes ago. That man had been made of assumptions. This version of Jake was something rawer, something that happened to men when the ground shifted under them and they realized they'd been standing on something they didn't build. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You do," Emily agreed. He blinked. He'd expected her to wave it off. People usually waved it off because it made everyone more comfortable. She didn't. I was out of line, he said, and the things I said, putting my hands on you, that was, he searched for the word, wrong. Yes, she said, it was. Davis, standing behind Jake, had the decency to look at his shoes. I'm sorry, Jake said, and he meant it. She could hear the difference between a man who was sorry he got caught and a man who was sorry he did the thing, and Jake Reynolds was the second kind. Whatever else he was, there was that. I accept your apology, Emily said. She picked up her whiskey. Sit down, Jake. He sat, not at his usual distance performing. He pulled the stool up and sat close to the bar, elbows down, the way a person sits when they're not trying to be anything in particular. Can I ask you something, he said. You're going to ask me something regardless, she said. So yes. The mission, he said carefully, the one that he didn't finish. The one that what? The one that put Viper 1 in the classified files with a missing presumed stamp on it. She was quiet. Walker looked at the bar top. That's not one question, Emily said finally. That's a door. I know, Jake said. I'm asking anyway. She set her glass down. She looked at him for a long moment. She was deciding again. He could see it. The calculation behind her eyes wasn't cold, it was careful. There was a difference. Cold meant she didn't care. Careful meant she cared very much and was trying to protect something. What do you already know, she said. Nothing official. The file on Viper 1 is sealed above the level of anyone in this bar. He glanced at Walker. No offense. None taken, Walker said dryly. I know the call sign, Jake continued. I know it showed up in a briefing about a failed extraction in Afghanistan 2017. I know the mission involves civilians. I know the official record shows no survivors from the primary team. He paused. And I know that the woman who ran point on that mission was described in the debrief as the reason any civilians made it out at all. Emily said nothing. That's what I know, Jake said, which is basically nothing. From across the bar, Ortega had drifted closer. Not aggressively, he'd brought his drink and pulled up a chair to the nearest table, which put him within earshot. He didn't pretend he wasn't listening. Special operations culture had its own rules about eavesdropping. If you were close enough to hear, you were close enough to be part of it, and pretending otherwise was considered a form of disrespect. Briggs had done the same thing on the other side. They weren't crowding her. They were bearing witness. There was a difference, and Emily recognized it. She looked at Ortega. He met her eyes and gave her a small nod. Not pressuring, just acknowledging. She looked at Briggs. Same nod. She looked at Sal behind the bar, who had stopped pretending to wipe glasses and was just standing there. Then she looked at Jake. The mission was called Operation Shepherd, she said. Her voice was level, informational. The way you speak when you are choosing information very deliberately over emotion, because emotion will take you somewhere you can't come back from in public. You won't find that name in any database you have access to. The official designation was something else. Shepherd was what we called it. Who's we, Jake asked. My team. She paused. 6 people, including me. The bar was quiet enough now that the music from the jukebox, something old, something country, was audible 3 tables away. The mission was a civilian extraction, Emily continued. A village in Kunar province. There was a school there, aid workers, local families who had been working with coalition forces and were now on a list. She stopped. You know what being on a list means? Yes, Jake said quietly. We had a 72-hour window. We went in on night 1. Everything was textbook for the first 6 hours. She turned her glass again. The ice had long since melted. Then someone talked. Walker's jaw tightened. An informant, he said. We never found out who. It doesn't matter anymore. She paused. What matters is that by hour 8, we were compromised. Full compromise. They knew our route, our numbers, our extraction point. They knew our comm frequencies. Someone burned you from the inside, Ortega said quietly from his table. Emily looked at him. Yes, she said. The word was flat, like a stone dropped into water that had already been disturbed too many times to ripple. My team leader was a man named Marcus Webb, she said. Best operator I have ever worked with. He made a call when the compromise happened. He split the team. 3 to the primary extraction with the civilians, 3 to create a diversion and hold the eastern approach. She paused. He put me with the civilians. Why you, Jake said. Because I was the best shot on the team. she said simply and without vanity, the way you state a professional fact. And because if anything went wrong at the extraction point, he needed someone there who could handle it without backup. And something went wrong, Walker said. It wasn't a question. Everything went wrong, Emily said. She picked up her whiskey and finally drank. Not a sip, a real drink, like she needed it to continue. The primary extraction point was hit before we reached it. We had to divert. I had 11 civilians with me. 2 aid workers, the rest were families, women and children, mostly 2 elderly men, 1 teenager, she paused, and 1 child, 8 years old. His name was Adam. Something shifted in the room, not the temperature, something else, the quality of attention. Jake had leaned forward without realizing it. Ortega had put his drink down. Davis, who had been hovering near the bar, sat down completely. We moved to the secondary point, Emily continued, 4 kilometers on foot, night, with 11 people who were not trained for anything that was happening to them. She paused. I lost one of the aid workers in the first kilometer, heart attack. He was 57. He just went down. I couldn't stop. I couldn't stay with him. I had to keep the rest of them moving. Nobody spoke. I carried the child for the last 2 kilometers, she said. Adam, he was too scared to keep pace. He kept trying to stop and look back. Kids do that. They think if they can see the danger, they can understand it. I put him on my back and I told him to close his eyes, and I told him we were going to be fine. She stopped. I wasn't sure we were going to be fine. But you made it, Jake said. We made it to the secondary point, she said. I got 10 of the 11 civilians out. The extraction helicopter took them. She looked at her glass. Then I went back. Walker turned to look at her. Back, he repeated. My team, she said. Webb and the others. I could hear the engagement on the radio. It was still active, which meant they were still alive. She paused, which meant I wasn't leaving. You went back into a compromised engagement zone, Walker said slowly. Alone, after extracting 11 civilians. Yes. That is, he stopped. What? She said. That's either the bravest thing I've ever heard, he said carefully, or the most reckless, she offered. I was going to say human, he said. She looked at him. For a moment, just a moment, the careful control slipped. Not dramatically, just around the eyes. The way grief shows in people who have learned not to show it anywhere else. I found Webb, she said. He was down, not dead, but down. I found the other 2. She stopped. She was quiet for 4 seconds. Exactly 4. Jake counted without meaning to. I lost 2 of the 3. I got Webb out. The jukebox changed songs, something slower. Webb made it, Walker said. Webb made it, she confirmed. He's in Colorado now. He does something with dogs, rescue dogs. He trains them. She almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile. He always loved dogs. Jake looked at his hands. And after, he said quietly, after, Emily said, I was medically evacuated. I spent 4 months in a military hospital in Germany, then stateside. Then, she paused, then I made a decision. To walk away, Walker said. To walk away, she confirmed. Did anyone try to stop you? Several people tried to stop me, she said. I was very politely informed that my skill set was extremely valuable and that there were positions available that would, she made a small gesture. I said no. Why, Jake said. She looked at him directly. Because I was very tired of losing people, she said. And I was very tired of the weight of a rifle. And I decided, she paused, choosing words carefully. I decided that I wanted to spend whatever time I had left putting people back together instead of the other way around. The bar was completely silent now. Not the performative silence of people pretending not to listen. The real silence of people who have heard something true and are giving it the space it deserves. So you became a nurse, Ortega said from his table. Not mockingly, just completing the sentence that she had left open. I became a nurse, Emily said. I went back to school. I did the work. I showed up every day and I became, she picked up her glass. Reasonably good at it. Reasonably good, Sal said from behind the bar, and his voice was rough in a way that had nothing to do with years of talking over bar noise. She pulled a guy back 3 weeks ago, cardiac arrest in the parking lot, full arrest. She was on her way in for her shift, found him next to his car. Emily looked at Sal. You heard about that, she said. His wife came in to thank whoever saved him, Sal said. Manager told me, said a nurse on her way to work. He paused. I figured. Jake Reynolds was looking at the bar top. Something was moving across his face that didn't have a military designation. It was the particular expression of a man who has been very confident about something for a very long time and is now understanding with the specific pain of genuine realization that confidence and accuracy are not the same thing. I said wrong place for someone like you, he said quietly. Yes, Emily said. I had no idea. No, she said. You didn't. She paused. Most people don't. That's the point. Is it better, he said, nursing instead of what I was? She considered the question, genuinely, not defensively. It's different. I'm still keeping people alive. I'm still reading situations fast. I'm still making decisions under pressure that affect whether someone goes home or doesn't. She paused. The weight is different, but the work isn't really. Do you miss it? Davis said from where he'd been sitting silently for the past 10 minutes. Everyone looked at him. He looked slightly surprised himself, like the question had left his mouth without full authorization. I miss the people, Emily said. I miss Webb. She stopped. She redirected. I miss the clarity of it. In the field, everything is very simple. You have an objective. You complete it or you don't. There's no paperwork. Oh, she stopped again. Something flickered. There's no insurance forms for the person in Bay 4 who you spent an hour keeping alive and now has to fight with their provider about whether the procedure was covered. Despite everything, Ortega laughed. It was a short, honest laugh. The kind that comes out of you before you can stop it, because something is just true enough to bypass the filter. Emily looked at him, and for the first time since she'd sat down at the bar, she smiled. Not the almost smile from before, an actual smile, small but real, and the room breathed. Walker watched the smile appear and disappear, and he filed it carefully. He had been in this business long enough to understand that what he was looking at was not a woman who was broken or diminished by what had happened to her. What he was looking at was a woman who had done the hardest kind of thing, not the dramatic kind, not the kind that gets a ceremony and a medal, but the quiet, daily, unacknowledged kind. The kind where you rebuild yourself without an audience and then live inside the rebuilt version so long that it becomes real. That kind was harder than any mission. He knew that personally. He was about to say something. He wasn't sure what, something true and simple, the kind of thing that didn't require much decoration when the door opened. The bar noise shifted, not dramatically, just a slight atmospheric change of a new presence entering a space, in the space registering it. Colonel Michael Hayes walked in. I was 53 years old and carried himself the way men carry themselves when rank has become so habitual that it lives in the body, not the mind. He was in civilian clothes, but nobody was fooled. Nobody who spent time around military personnel was ever fooled by civilian clothes on a certain type of person. The clothes changed. The posture didn't. He was looking for someone. His aide was behind him, scanning the room efficiently. Hayes's eyes moved through the bar at the practiced ease of someone who assessed spaces for a living, past the pool table, past the big SEAL table, past Ortega and Briggs, past Sal, and then they stopped. He had found what he was looking for. He crossed the bar without hesitation, and every person between him and Emily Carter stepped back without being asked, not because they knew who he was, but because something in his movement communicated that he was going somewhere that mattered, and the only appropriate response was to clear the way. He stopped in front of Emily. She had her back to the door. She'd chosen the stool that gave her sightlines to the exits, not to the entrance, because the entrance was Sal's problem, and she trusted Sal, but she had known he was there from the moment the door opened. She had heard the particular quality of his footsteps. She had processed it. She had decided to finish her thought to Walker before she turned around. She turned around now. Hayes looked at her. He looked at her the way you look at something you were told was gone and then is not gone, and your brain is still trying to reconcile the information with the reality in front of you. Emily Carter, when he said, his voice was the voice of a man who was working very hard to keep it level. Colonel Hayes, she said, he stopped. He started again. You're supposed to be, I know, she said. People keep saying that tonight. He looked at Walker. Walker gave him nothing. He looked at Jake. Jake gave him even less. How long, Hayes? How long, Hayes said, turning back to Emily. How long have you been here? San Diego, about 4 years. 4 years, he repeated. 4 years and nobody. I was careful, she said. Clearly. His jaw was tight. Not angry, something more complicated than angry. The expression of a man who is simultaneously relieved and unsettled and trying to figure out which feeling he's allowed to have first. We looked for you. I know, she said again. The file is still. I know what the file says, Colonel. You know what it means. For us to find out you're alive, you're here, you've been. He gestured at the bar, at her hospital badge, at the plain gray shirt with the beer stain that was still faintly visible. You've been doing this. Yes, she said. I've been doing this. Emily. I'm not coming back, she said, quietly, without aggression. The way you say something that is simply true and has been true for a long time. If that's what this is. Hayes was quiet for a moment. That's not what this is, he said. Something in the air shifted. Then what is it, she said. He looked at her, and something in his face changed. The military composure that had carried him across the bar fractured just slightly at the edges, the way a good man's face fractures when he has to say something that the job requires and the human part of him hates. I need you to look at something, he said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a photograph. He put it on the bar in front of her. Emily looked down at it. The bar was completely silent. And then Emily Carter, who had survived an ambush in Kunar province, who had carried a child on her back through 2 kilometers of hostile territory, who had made it out when her team didn't, who had spent 6 years rebuilding herself into someone quiet and useful and safe, went very still. Not the practiced stillness of someone trained to control their responses. The real stillness. The kind that happens when something hits you in the place you didn't armor. She picked up the photograph. Her hand was not shaking, but it wanted to. In the photograph was a young man, maybe 20 years old, maybe 22, dark hair, dark eyes, a face that was young but had old things in it, standing in front of what appeared to be a small building, surrounded by children in school uniforms, smiling the particular smile of someone who is doing exactly what they are supposed to be doing with their life and knows it. There was a caption on the back of the photograph, handwritten in English. It said, Adam Rahman, Kunar Province, Afghanistan, age 22, educator and community advocate. Emily looked at it for a long time. Jake, who could see the photograph from where he was sitting, looked at Emily's face and then looked away because some expressions are private even in public spaces. Adam, Emily said. He grew up, Hayes said quietly. He built a school. It's been operating for 2 years. Hayes paused. He's been asking about you for about a year, trying to find the person who carried him out. Emily set the photograph down on the bar. She pressed her fingertips against it for a moment, lightly, the way you touch something that matters. He's alive, she said, and her voice for the first time all night had something in it that was not controlled or measured. Something that was purely and simply relief. He's actually alive. He's alive, Hayes confirmed. And he built a school, she said. He built a school. She was quiet. Walker beside her did something he hadn't done in 30 years of professional stoicism. He put his hand briefly on her arm, just for a moment, just the weight of a hand. She didn't pull back. Why are you showing me this now? She said to Hayes. Hayes looked at the photograph, then he looked at her. Because 6 days ago, he said slowly, Adam Rahman was taken. The bar did not go quiet because it was already quiet, but something in the quality of the silence changed. Emily's head came up. Her eyes were different now. Not the careful, measured eyes of the woman who had been ordering whiskey and deflecting conversation. Something older, something that had been sitting in the dark for 6 years and had just heard a sound it recognized. Taken, she said. Yes. By whom? Hayes said a name. Emily closed her eyes. For 2 seconds, she was somewhere else, completely. Behind those closed eyes was 6 years of distance from a world she had left. Behind those closed eyes was a calculation she hadn't made in 6 years. A kind of thinking that used different parts of the brain, then nursing did different parts of the body, different parts of the self. She opened her eyes. She picked up her whiskey. She drank the last of it. She set the glass down on the bar carefully, quietly, like she was setting down something she wouldn't be picking it up again. And she said to nobody in particular and to everyone in the room, tell me everything. Jake Reynolds looked at Thomas Walker. Thomas Walker looked at Colonel Hayes. And Colonel Hayes, for the first time since he'd walked through that door with the photograph and the dread of what he had to ask, looked like a man who had just remembered why he'd spent his entire career believing that certain people were not replaceable. Outside the bar, the San Diego night was cool and indifferent. Inside at the end of the counter, a woman who had spent 6 years being only a nurse was sitting very straight on her stool, her empty glass in front of her, her hospital badge still clipped to her pocket, and her eyes carrying something that Jake Reynolds would later describe to his teammates as the most focused thing he had ever seen on a human face. Not anger, not fear, not even determination exactly. Purpose. Pure, quiet, absolute purpose. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that simply exists and moves and does not stop. Tell me everything. Those 3 words changed the air in the room the way a barometric drop changes the air before a storm. Not dramatic, not loud, just a fundamental shift in pressure that every person in the bar registered somewhere below conscious thought. Hayes pulled out the stool across from Emily and sat down. He put his hands flat on the bar. He looked at her the way men look at people they are about to ask something enormous of, with the specific combination of respect and guilt that comes from knowing exactly how much the ask costs and asking anyway. The group that took him is called Hadar, Hayes said. Splinter faction. They've been operating in Eastern Kunar for about 18 months. Small, mobile, very well funded. They're not ideological in the traditional sense, they're transactional. They take people who have value and they sell that value to whoever is buying. And Adam has value because of the school, Emily said. Adam has value because of who's been funding the school, Hayes said. 2 American NGOs and 1 European foundation. In their calculus that makes him a political asset. Proof of Western interference. They're planning to use him publicly. He paused. We have a 72-hour window before that happens. Jake Reynolds, sitting 2 stools down, did the math quietly in his head. 72 hours. The same window as Operation Shepherd. The same province. He looked at the bar and said nothing. What's the asset picture? Emily said. Hayes' aide, a young captain named Torres, who had been standing 3 feet back and slightly to the left this entire time, with the careful invisibility of someone very good at their job, leaned forward and placed a thin folder on the bar. Emily opened it. She was quiet for 30 seconds. Walker leaned slightly to see without appearing to lean. He caught enough to recognize the format satellite imagery grid references, timeline of contact. He recognized the structure of a problem that had been worked by people who knew what they were doing and had hit a wall they couldn't get past. Your team, Emily said to Hayes without looking up from the folder. That's the problem, Hayes said. She looked up. The 2 operators best positioned for this are both medically non-deployable, Hayes said. One took shrapnel in Bahrain 4 weeks ago. The other has a family situation that it doesn't matter. The point is the team I would normally send is not complete, and the timeline doesn't allow for don't, Emily said. Hayes stopped. Don't build to it, she said. Don't construct the argument. Just say what you came here to say. Hayes looked at her. I need Viper 1, he said. The bar was quiet enough that the words had weight. Jake looked at the bar top. Walker looked at Hayes. Ortega from his table looked at Emily. Emily closed the folder. She placed her hands on top of it. She was quiet for a long moment, and the quiet was not the quiet of someone deciding. It was the quiet of someone who had already decided something 6 years ago and was now sitting with the cost of that decision being tested. I'm a nurse, she said. You're also the best long-range operator I have ever had in any program, Hayes said. And you know this terrain, you know the people, you know them. I walked away, she said. I know, yeah. I told you I was done. I know that too. Then you know why I'm saying no. Emily, Hayes leaned forward. His voice dropped. It's Adam. It's the boy you carried out. She stood up, not dramatically. She simply stood the way you stand when you need to move your body because sitting still is no longer possible. She walked 3 steps down the bar. She stopped. She had her back to all of them. She was looking at the wall, at the patches and photographs, and the handwritten notes from 20 years of people passing through this place, and she was breathing with the specific controlled rhythm of someone managing a physiological response. Nobody spoke. Not Jake, not Walker, not Ortega, who had seen enough to know when talking was the wrong tool. Davis looked at Jake. Jake shook his head once. Don't. Sal picked up a glass and set it down and picked up another one, and the small sounds of it were the only movement in the room. 40 seconds passed. Emily turned around. Her face was composed, not cold. Composed, which is different. Cold is the absence of feeling. Composed is the presence of feeling being held in shape by something stronger. What's the extraction point? She said. Hayes exhaled. Secondary staging area 12 clicks from the compound. We have... Who else is going? She said. Hayes hesitated. That hesitation told her something she hadn't expected. Who else is going, Colonel? She said again. And her voice had an edge in it now. The specific edge of someone who has processed a piece of information that doesn't add up and needs the math corrected immediately. That's part of what I need to discuss with you, Hayes said carefully. How many? She said. Hayes looked at Torres. Torres looked at the folder. Currently, Hayes said, the operational team consists of you. The bar went very still. Jake Reynolds' head came up. Walker straightened. You want to send one person, Emily said. Not a question, a statement being tested against reality to see if reality would push back. The asset picture is limited in the timeline. You want to send one person into Kunar province to extract a civilian from a transactional armed group with unknown numbers, Emily said, and her voice was perfectly flat, with a 72-hour window and no backup. There would be air support on standby. Standby, she said. Emily, standby is not support, she said. Standby is a promise made by people who are not there. Hayes pressed his lips together. I know what I'm asking, he said. Do you, she said, and she said it without anger, with something more honest than anger, which was a kind of tired clarity. Because the last time someone sent a small team into Kunar with insufficient backup and a compromised window, I came home alone. The room absorbed that. Hayes sat with it. He didn't deflect. He didn't qualify. He just sat with what she'd said and let it be true because it was true, and the only response to something true is to acknowledge it. Yes, he said, I know exactly what I'm asking, and I'm asking anyway, because there is nobody else. Jake Reynolds stood up. He did it the way he'd done everything tonight after the glass broke, without performance, without audience calculation, just as a direct physical expression of something decided. There's me, he said. Hayes looked at him. Lieutenant Reynolds. I'm off rotation for 2 weeks, Jake said. No active deployment, no medical holds. And I know Kunar. I did 2 rotations in the province in Tui 2 and Tui 3. He paused. I'm not Viper 1, but I'm not nothing either. Emily looked at Jake. She looked at him with the same assessment she had used earlier in the evening when she'd read his sleep patterns, in his drink count, in the way he held his body. But this look was different in quality. This one was going deeper. Past the performance she'd stripped away over the course of the night. Past the confidence, in the competitiveness, in the grin that had started this whole thing. Down to what was underneath, which was a man who, when he understood he had done something wrong, picked up the broken glass himself. You've never worked with me, she said. No, he said. You don't know how I operate. No. You'd be going in under my command, my decisions, my timeline, my calls. Yes, he said. And there was no hesitation in it. Walker stood up. Everyone looked at him. He picked up his club soda and finished it. He set the glass on the bar with a quiet finality that was somehow louder than anything that had happened in the last 10 minutes. I'm 61 years old, he said. I have a bad knee, mild tinnitus, and my ex-wife would probably say my judgment has always been questionable. He looked at Hayes. I'm also the only person in this building who has been inside a Hadar compound and come out. He paused. 2019. It doesn't appear in my official record. You can check with whoever you need to check with. Hayes looked at Torres. Torres was already on his phone. 20 seconds passed. Torres looked up and nodded once. Hayes looked at Walker. Master Chief, he said. Retired, Walker said. Not tonight, Hayes said quietly. Walker sat back down. Ortega had crossed the bar. He was standing behind Walker now, and he looked at Hayes with the particular expression of a man who has already made his decision and is simply waiting for the conversation to catch up to it. Army Special Forces. 12 years, Ortega said. I was in Kunar in 2020 for a training rotation. I know the terrain, and I know some of the local contacts who might still be viable. He paused. And I've got nothing going on this weekend. The last sentence was delivered with such complete deadpan that Jake laughed. He didn't mean to. It came out of him the same way Ortega's laugh had come out earlier, bypassing the filter, too honest to stop. Even Emily looked at Ortega. Nothing going on this weekend, she repeated. My sister's birthday party is Saturday, but I can send a card, Ortega said. Briggs, Emily said, looking past Ortega. Briggs, still at his table, looked up. He was a big man, quiet in the way that very capable people are often quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've learned that saying it uses energy better spent elsewhere. Ranger, 8 years, Briggs said. I'm in. Emily looked at all of them. She looked at Jake, who had stood up first, at Walker, who had 30 years of things he couldn't talk about, and a bad knee and had stood up anyway. At Ortega with his sister's birthday party, at Briggs, who had said 2 words and meant them completely. She looked at Hayes. This is not a sanctioned operation, she said. Correct, Hayes said. If something goes wrong, there is no official record of this conversation, Hayes said. There is no official record of this team. If something goes wrong, the people in this bar were never here. That's the part that never changes, Emily said, and her voice was not bitter, just accurate, just the particular weariness of someone who has understood the terms of a thing for a long time and made peace with them. All right, she said. She picked up the folder. She opened it again. And the bar, without anyone declaring it, had become something else entirely. Not a gathering place for veterans on a Friday night. A planning room. The jukebox was still playing. Sal was still behind the bar. But the quality of attention had shifted into something operational, and everyone present felt the shift and adjusted to it with the ease of people who had done exactly this kind of adjusting before. Talk to me about the compound layout, Emily said to Hayes. Hayes nodded at Torres, who placed 3 more photographs on the bar. Emily studied them. Her eyes moved fast and stopped and moved again. Jake watched her do it and recognized the pattern she was building, a picture, layering information, the same thing he did, but faster, noticeably faster. One primary entrance, she said. Eastern face. Guards rotate every... She looked at Hayes. Every 4 hours based on the surveillance timeline, Torres said. 4 hours is lazy, Walker said from beside her. Lazy is good, Emily said. Lazy means predictable. She pointed at one of the photographs. This structure here, secondary building. The shadow line suggested it's got a different roof height than the rest. They're keeping him somewhere with controlled access, not the main building. She paused. Why, wham? We think it's temperature controlled, Torres said. Medical equipment. They want him healthy for the public display. They want him talking, Emily said. Yes. Which means they haven't heard him. As of 48 hours ago, correct? How fresh is this intelligence? The satellite pass was 18 hours ago, Torres said. Ground-level asset gave us a voice confirmation 12 hours ago. 12 hours is a long time, Ortega said. 12 hours is all we have, Hayes said. Emily looked at the photographs for another 30 seconds. Then she said, we go in on the second night, not the first. They'll be expecting a first-night attempt if they know anyone's coming. And someone always talks. She looked at Hayes. You said the last operation was burned from the inside. Operation Shepherd, Hayes said quietly. Yes. The same network that sold us then, are they still active? Hayes and Torres exchanged a look. Emily caught it. They're still active, she said. It was not a question. We believe there is some overlap, Hayes said carefully. Colonel, her voice went quieter, which meant it went harder. Are we going to be burned again? We have taken significant steps to limit the information chain on this operation, Hayes said. The number of people who know about it is in this bar. And your aide, Emily said, looking at Torres. Captain Torres has my full confidence, Hayes said. Emily looked at Torres directly. Torres met her eyes without flinching. He was young, maybe 28, and he had the look of someone who had been working at a level of pressure that aged a person faster than years did. His eyes were older than his face. Captain Torres, Emily said, has anyone approached you in the last 72 hours about your current assignment? Torres blinked. Once. No, ma'am. Has anyone asked you anything about Colonel Hayes' schedule? No. Has anyone asked you anything about Kunar Province Eastern Operations? Or the name Adam Rahman? Torres went very still. The stillness lasted 1 second too long. Emily saw it. So did Walker. So did Jake. Captain, Hayes said, and his voice had changed completely. Sir, Torres said, it wasn't someone asked me a question 3 days ago. A colleague, I didn't think. What was the question, Emily said. Torres's jaw was tight. He was working through shame and professional training simultaneously. He asked me if Hayes was working any Middle East assets right now. I said the colonel's schedule was confidential. I didn't confirm anything. What was the colleague's name, Emily said. Torres said a name. Hayes went absolutely still. Walker looked at Hayes. Jake looked at Walker. You know that name, Emily said to Hayes. Yes, Hayes said. His voice was very controlled, very flat. The flatness of a man holding something in because letting it out would be counterproductive, and he was above everything productive. Is that name connected to what burned Operation Shepherd? Emily said. Hayes was quiet for 4 seconds. We never confirmed the source of the burn on Shepherd, he said. But Emily said, but that name has appeared in 2 subsequent investigations in an adjacent capacity, Hayes said. The bar was utterly silent. Emily set down the folder. She looked at Torres. You didn't know, she said. It wasn't an accusation, it was an assessment. You answered a colleague's casual question. You didn't confirm anything operational. You did nothing wrong. Torres exhaled. However, Emily said, if that name is connected to what I think it's connected to, then our information chain is already compromised. Which means, she looked at Hayes, which means the timeline just changed. How? Hayes said. We don't go in on the second night, she said. We go in tonight. Jake Reynolds looked up. Tonight, he repeated. If they know someone's looking for Adam, they will move him. They will move him within 24 hours, 48 at the most. She looked around the bar. At Jake, at Walker, at Ortega and Briggs. We have what we need in this room. We have 4 operators and a retired special warfare commander. We have current satellite imagery. We have a ground-level asset who gave a voice confirmation 12 hours ago. She paused. And we have something that nobody on the other side is expecting. What's that? Jake said. They think Viper 1 is dead, she said. The room sat with that. She was right. That was the thing none of them had said yet. The thing that had been sitting in the corner of the conversation since Hayes walked in with the photograph. Whoever had been connected to the burn on Operation Shepherd, whoever had sold her team's position in Kannar province in 2017, believed she was gone. Believed the missing presumed stamp was accurate. Believed the woman who had walked out of that province with 11 civilians and 1 downed operator was not a factor. That belief was the operational advantage, and it had a very short shelf life. If Torres's colleague makes 1 phone call, Emily said, that advantage is gone. Hayes looked at Torres. Torres looked at his phone. I need you to step outside, Hayes said to Torres. Give me your phone. You'll get it back. Torres handed it over without a word. He walked to the door and threw it. Hayes looked at his own phone. He made a call. He spoke 3 sentences. He hung up. Torres's colleague is being picked up as of right now, Hayes said, for an unrelated administrative matter that will keep him occupied for the next 72 hours. Good, Emily said. She picked up the folder again. The next 40 minutes were the most compressed, most focused 40 minutes that Jake Reynolds would remember for the rest of his life. Emily Carter, who had been sitting alone at the end of a bar 3 hours ago with a beer stain on her shirt and nothing but exhaustion in her eyes, dismantled and reassembled the operational picture with a speed and precision that made Jake feel for the first time in his career genuinely humbled. She didn't perform it. She didn't explain each step. She just worked, and the rest of them worked around her, and it had the particular quality of watching someone do the thing they were actually built to do. Walker provided compound topography from his 2019 experience. Ortega called a contact a local fixer he'd used in 2020, who was still active and still reliable, and had a 7-minute conversation in Pashto that produced 3 pieces of current intelligence about guard rotation. Briggs sat with the photographs and produced in silence a hand-drawn approach diagram on the back of a bar napkin that Torres, who had been allowed back in with his phone, returned after Hayes confirmed the colleague was contained, immediately photographed and transmitted to the air support team being assembled. Jake watched all of it, and he watched Emily. She caught him watching. You're not just a SEAL tonight, she said without looking up from the photographs. You understand that? I understand, he said. You follow my calls, not because of rank, because I know this specific terrain and this specific problem in a way that cannot be briefed in 40 minutes. Understood, he said. If I tell you to do something that doesn't make sense to you, I do it and ask questions later, he said. She looked up at him. No, she said. If I tell you to do something that doesn't make sense to you, you tell me immediately. 1 sentence. I need the reason. Then I give you the reason, or I tell you there isn't time and you decide from there. She paused. I don't want soldiers. I want people who are thinking. Jake was quiet for a moment. Most commanders don't say that, he said. Most commanders haven't done this with 5 people in a bar napkin, she said. Ortega from across the room laughed that honest laugh again. Walker looked at the bar napkin diagram. This is actually not bad, he said to Briggs. I've had worse, Briggs said. At 11:47, Emily closed the folder. She put both hands flat on the bar. She looked at each of them in turn. Jake, Walker, Ortega, Briggs, Hayes. Once we move, she said, we don't stop. There is no pause, no reconsideration, no second guessing at the point of action. Everything gets second guessed right now in this bar before we walk out that door. So, she looked around. What am I missing? What doesn't work? What's the part of this that gets us killed? Silence. Then Walker said, the secondary building. We don't know the interior layout. Correct, Emily said. We go in tactile, feel the space. The guard rotation Ortega's contact gave us is 12 hours old, Briggs said. Correct. We add a buffer of 30 minutes on either side of the rotation window. We don't move during the buffer. Air support response time, Jake said. Torres said standby. What's the actual response window? Hayes said 11 minutes from the call. Jake and Emily looked at each other. 11 minutes was a long time. We don't call for air unless we are completely out of other options, Emily said. Air support is the last card, not the first. Agreed, Jake said. Anything else? Emily said. Silence. She looked at Hayes. Get us transport, she said. We need to be wheels up in 2 hours. Hayes stood. He was already on the phone before he reached the door. Emily looked at Sal. Sal had been behind the bar this entire time. He had not said a word for the past 40 minutes. He had refilled drinks without being asked. He had kept the far end of the bar clear. He had done what he always did in this place, which was create the conditions for whatever needed to happen. Sal, Emily said. Yeah, he said. I need the back room. About 20 minutes. He reached under the bar and put a key on the counter. She picked it up. She looked around the bar one more time, at the patches on the wall, at the photographs, at the handwritten notes from units she had never served with, but recognized in the way you recognize people who speak the same language. She picked up her hospital badge from the bar. She looked at it for a moment. Emily Carter, RN. She put it in her jacket pocket. She picked up the folder. She walked toward the back room. At the door, she stopped. She turned back. She looked at Jake Reynolds, who had grabbed her arm 3 hours ago and said, wrong place for someone like you, and had been wrong in every possible way. And she said, get some water, all of you. Hydrate now. You won't have another chance for a while. Jake Reynolds looked at the glass of water Sal was already placing on the bar. He picked it up. He drank. And for the first time since this night started, Jake Reynolds understood completely and without any remaining doubt that he was the least experienced person in the room. Not because of rank, not because of years, but because of something that couldn't be measured in deployments or training cycles or commendations. The woman walking toward that back room had done something he hadn't. She had survived the unsurvivable, walked away from it, rebuilt herself from the ground up, and was now by choice for a child she had carried on her back, through the dark, walking back toward it. Not because she was asked, not because of orders, because some debts are written in a different kind of ink, the kind that doesn't fade, the kind that finds you 6 years later in a bar in San Diego on a Friday night when all you wanted was a quiet drink and a few hours of peace. The door to the back room closed behind her. The bar breathed. Jake looked at Walker. She's something else, he said. Walker picked up his club soda. Son, he said, you have no idea. The back room of the Anchor smelled like old cardboard and motor oil, and the particular staleness of a space that existed for storage and had been asked to be something else tonight. Emily didn't mind. She had planned operations in worse places. She had planned operations in the back of moving vehicles, in drainage ditches, in a bombed-out schoolroom in Kandahar, with a flashlight and a hand-drawn map that turned out to be wrong in 3 critical ways. A storage room in San Diego was practically a luxury. She spread the folder open on the small table, and she stood over it, and she let herself do the things she hadn't allowed herself to do in front of the others. She let herself be afraid. Not for long. Just long enough to feel the full shape of it, to take its measure, to understand exactly what she was working with. Fear was information. The operators who got killed were the ones who pretended they didn't have it, who pushed it down so deep it came back up at the wrong moment. and made them freeze or rush or make a decision that bypassed logic entirely. Emily had learned in her first year of fieldwork that the correct relationship with fear was not suppression. It was acknowledgement. You looked at it, you said, yes, I see you, I understand what you're telling me, and then you made your plan anyway. She was afraid of going back, not of the operation itself, not of the physical danger which was real and significant, and she had calculated it with the same clinical accuracy she brought to everything operational. She was afraid of what it would cost her internally. 6 years of Emily Carter, 6 years of a life that was quieter and smaller and more honest in certain ways than anything she had lived before it. 6 years of patience and shifts in the specific satisfaction of a person stabilized, a crisis managed, a family told their person was going to be okay. She was afraid that if she put the rifle back in her hands, she would not be able to put it down again. She stood with that fear for 2 minutes and 14 seconds exactly, because she had a habit of counting when she needed to control herself, and then she set it aside. Adam was waiting. She picked up the bar napkin diagram that Briggs had made. It was good work. Clean lines, accurate proportions based on the satellite images, logical approach, vectors marked in pencil. Briggs had written nothing, no labels, no annotations, because he was the kind of person who understood that written information was a liability and drawn information was a map that only the person who made it could fully interpret. She had worked with people like that before. She trusted them more than the ones who over-explained. She was still looking at it when the door opened. She didn't turn around. "It's me," Walker said. "I know," she said. She had known from the footfall. His bad knee produced a specific weight distribution that was identifiable even through a closed door. He came in and stood beside her and looked at the diagram. "Briggs is good," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "Reynolds is better than he showed tonight," Walker said. "The way he presented himself at the bar, that's not who he is in the field. I've seen his file. He's steady under pressure. Good instincts." "I know," Emily said. "I read people remember." Walker was quiet for a moment. "You scared?" he said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. He nodded. "Good," he said. "You," she said. "Oh." "Terrified," he said, completely calmly. "My knee is going to be a problem on rough terrain. I'm 11 years older than I was the last time I did anything like this. And I've been drinking club soda for 4 years, which means I have complete clarity about exactly how dangerous this is, which is its own kind of problem." Despite everything, Emily smiled. It was the same small, real smile from before. Walker caught it. "There she is," he said quietly. "Don't," she said. "I'm not doing anything," he said. "You're being kind to me," she said. "Don't do that right now. I need to stay composed," he said. "Yes." "Emily." He turned to face her directly the way he had in the bar with the full weight of 30 years behind it. "You can be both, scared and ready, human and capable. You don't have to choose." She looked at him. "That's the thing about Viper One," he said. "The reason that name meant what it meant. It wasn't because you were cold. It was because you weren't. You made the hard calls and you felt every single one of them and you kept going anyway." He paused. "That's not a weakness. That's the whole point." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked back at the diagram. "We need to talk about the approach," she said. "Yes, we do," he said. They talked for 11 minutes. When they walked back out, the bar had reorganized itself without being told. Jake and Ortega were at the center table with Torres going over the satellite images again. Briggs had found a topographical reference on his phone and was comparing it against his napkin diagram with the focused intensity of someone solving a problem that genuinely interested him. Sal had produced coffee from somewhere, real coffee, not the watered-down kind, the kind you made when you understood that people needed to be functional rather than comfortable, and it was distributed across the table without ceremony. Hayes was on the phone in the corner. He finished the call as Emily approached. "Transport is arranged," he said. "Military charter out of Miramar. Wheels up in 90 minutes. We link up with a forward support element in Germany, 8-hour layover for final equipment and briefing. Then we stage from Bagram." He paused. "Or what's left of it." "What's the support element?" Emily said. "2 logistics personnel and a medical officer," Hayes said. "Who's the medical officer?" she said. Hayes told her the name. She knew it. "Hargrove," she said. "You worked together," Hayes said. "Once, briefly." She paused. "He's good. Very good." She looked at the room. "All right, we have 90 minutes. Use them." What followed was the kind of 90 minutes that people in that profession remembered with a specific clarity, not because it was dramatic, but because it was precise. Each person in that bar knew exactly what they were doing and did it without being directed. Jake went through his personal kit with the systematic efficiency of someone who had packed and repacked for deployment enough times that his hands knew the checklist before his brain did. Walker made 3 phone calls each under 2 minutes, each producing something useful. A contact number in Kunar, a current frequency for a regional communications channel, a name that Ortega recognized and confirmed was still reliable. Briggs said almost nothing and accomplished more than anyone. Emily went through the folder one more time. She memorized the satellite images in the specific way she had trained herself to memorize things, not photographically, not as pictures, but as spatial relationships. She didn't need to see the compound again. She needed to know where everything was relative to everything else. She needed to be able to navigate it in the dark under pressure with incomplete information and changing conditions. She had done this before. She had done this in this exact province. She pushed that thought down. At 12:47 in the morning, they walked out of the Anchor. Sal stood at the door. He didn't say anything operational. He didn't say good luck or be careful or come back safe. He looked at each of them as they passed, and he gave them the particular nod of a man who understood exactly what was happening and had decided that words would only diminish it. When Emily passed him, he said one thing. "The coffee's here when you get back." She looked at him. "Thank you, Sal," she said, and she walked out into the San Diego night. The drive to Miramar took 19 minutes. Nobody spoke much. Jake sat beside Emily in the back of the vehicle Hayes had arranged, and he looked out the window at the city passing by, and he thought about the night he'd walked into the Anchor, about the woman sitting alone at the end of the bar, about the glass he'd slammed down in front of her face and the laughter he'd triggered and the way she hadn't flinched. He thought about what it cost to not flinch. He thought about everything that had to happen to a person before not flinching became possible. "Jake," Emily said. He looked at her. "Your rotations in Kunar," she said, 2022 and 2023. "Did you work with any local assets in the eastern sector?" "One," he said, "a man named Farhan. He was a translator initially and then moved into a more active capacity. I don't know if he's still Farhan Khalil," Ortega said from the front seat. Jake looked at him. "You know him?" "He's one of the names Walker's contact gave us," Ortega said. "He's still active, and he's 20 clicks from the compound." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Farhan is good," he said. "He's reliable. He kept 3 of my guys alive in 2023 when an approach went sideways. He doesn't panic." "Can you reach him?" Emily said. "I have a number," Jake said. "I don't know if it's current." "Try it when we're airborne," she said. "Understood." She looked back out the window. Jake watched her profile for a moment, the particular stillness of someone whose mind was moving very fast while their body was completely quiet. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You were going to ask something regardless," she said. It was exactly what she had said to him in the bar hours ago. He recognized it. "What was it like," he said after, "when you first became Emily Carter? The first days?" She was quiet for a moment. "Strange," she said. "Everything was very loud. Not literally, but the absence of," she searched. "The absence of purpose was loud. I was used to every hour having a function, a clear objective. And then suddenly I was in an apartment in Portland with a lease and a grocery list and nothing that needed to happen before dawn." "How long did that last?" he said. "About 6 months," she said, "until I started nursing school. And then it was different because it was hard enough to fill the space." "Did you miss it, the work?" She looked at him. "Every day," she said, "in the beginning, and then less. And then it became background. The way a sound becomes background when you've heard it long enough. It was still there, I just stopped hearing it as loudly." "Until tonight," he said. She turned back to the window. "Until tonight," she said. The flight to Germany was 8 hours and 20 minutes. Emily slept for 4 of them, not because she wasn't anxious, because she had learned a long time ago that sleep before an operation was not a luxury. It was maintenance. Your body was equipment, and equipment needed to be maintained. She closed her eyes 40 minutes after takeoff, and she was gone in the particular way of field-trained people, completely and immediately like a switch thrown. Walker slept 3 hours. Briggs slept 5. Ortega didn't sleep, but he sat quietly with his eyes closed, which was his version of the same thing. Jake Reynolds lay on his back and looked at the ceiling and thought about every decision he had made in the past 12 hours, and which of them he would change if he could go back. Grabbing her arm, yes, he would change that. He would walk into that bar and sit at the other end and keep his mouth shut and drink his beer and go home. Standing up to a volunteer, no, he would not change that. The difference between those two decisions felt important. He wasn't sure why yet. He thought he would understand it better later. He slept for 1 hour before Germany. The forward support element at the airfield outside Frankfurt was exactly what Hayes had promised two logistics personnel who worked with the specific quiet competence of people who spent their professional lives making impossible things possible without recognition and Hargrove. Dr. James Hargrove was 55 years old and looked like someone's grandfather and had field-treated gunshot wounds in 6 countries and once performed an emergency appendectomy in the back of a moving vehicle with improvised instruments and a flashlight held by a person who was simultaneously driving and asked him every 45 seconds if he was done yet. He shook Emily's hand. "Heard you were dead," he said. "Heard the same thing," she said. "Clearly, we were both misinformed," he said. He looked at her the way medical people looked at each other, assessing professional and completely without the kind of reverence that the operators were still slightly managing. "You look tired." "I'm fine," she said. "You look tired and you're fine," he said. "Classic." He opened his kit. "Let me check your BP before we stage. Just baseline." "Hargrove, 30 seconds," he said. "Then you can go back to being invincible." She held out her arm. He checked it. 118/74, he said, for someone who apparently had a full 14-hour shift yesterday and then planned a cross-continental operation from a bar stool. That's genuinely impressive. "Are you done?" she said. "I'm done," he said. "Go be terrifying." The 8-hour layover in Germany was not 8 hours of rest. It was 8 hours of final preparation equipment, checks, intelligence updates, and the particular grinding work of making a plan that was 60% complete into something that was 80% complete, because in this type of operation, 80% was as good as it got, and you made up the other 20 on the ground. 2 hours into the layover, Torres brought an update. He put it on the table in front of Emily without speaking. She read it. Her face did not change. She passed it to Walker. Walker read it. His face did not change either, but his hand tightened very slightly around his coffee cup. He passed it to Jake. Jake read it. He set it down on the table. "They moved him," Jake said. "Yes," Emily said. 6 hours ago," Jake said. "The voice confirmation is now 18 hours old and the satellite pass is 30 hours old," Emily said. "Yes." Jake looked at her. "We're going in blind on the interior," he said. "We were always going in partially blind," she said. "Now we're going in with less. That's different from blind." "It's a significant difference in risk," Walker said. "Yes," Emily said. "It is." "So what do we do?" Ortega said. She was quiet for a moment. "Jake," she said, "did you reach Farhan?" He answered on the second ring, Jake said. "He's been tracking the Hadar movement in the eastern sector for the past 3 weeks. He says they have 2 primary locations they rotate between. The compound in the satellite images was one. He knows the other." The table was very quiet. "He knows the other," Emily repeated. "He can lead us to it," Jake said. "He says the second location is smaller, fewer personnel. They use it when they want to reduce visibility." "Which is exactly what they'd want right now," Walker said. "Exactly what they'd want," Emily confirmed. She looked at Hayes, who had been standing at the edge of the table. "Change the staging point," she said. "We link up with Farhan. He takes us to the second location." She paused. "We go in within 6 hours of landing, before they move him again." Hayes was already on a satellite phone. Jake looked at Emily. "You trust Farhan's information," he said. "I trust your read of Farhan," she said. "You said he kept 3 of your guys alive. What was the situation?" "Ambush on a secondary road. He saw it before we did. He was the one who called the stop. If he hadn't," Jake stopped. "If he hadn't, we wouldn't be having this conversation." "Then yes," Emily said. "I trust the information." Jake nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need to tell you something." She looked at him. "When I walked into the anchor tonight," he said, "I was coming off 3 weeks of nothing. Not bad nothing, just the particular kind of nothing that comes after a deployment when you're back and everything's fine and you're supposed to be resting, recovering. He paused. And I couldn't. I've been back 3 weeks and I've been running on empty because there was nothing to run toward. She watched him. I'm not saying that's a reason for the way I acted, he said. I'm not making excuses. I'm saying, he stopped. He tried again. I'm saying that right now, sitting at this table, going over this plan, knowing that in a few hours we're going to go in and get him out, I feel more like myself than I have in 3 weeks. He looked at her. Is that wrong? She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. That's not wrong. She paused. That's the thing they don't tell you, that the work makes sense to you in a way that nothing else quite does. And the hardest part isn't the danger. The hardest part is learning to make sense of yourself without it. Is that why you became a nurse? He said. It's part of why, she said. I needed the work to have the same urgency, the same consequence, where your decisions matter immediately and completely, and there's no paperwork layer between what you do and what happens. She paused. In the ER, someone is alive or they're not, and what you do in the next 30 seconds is the determining factor. That's the same structure. Just without the rifle, Jake said. Just without the rifle, she agreed. He looked at his hands. Do you want it back, he said. The rifle. Right now. Is there a part of you that... Don't romanticize it, she said, and her voice was very quiet and very direct. Don't make it into something it isn't because of how this night has gone. The rifle is a tool. Tools have appropriate context. I'm picking it back up tonight because Adam's life requires it, not because I want it, not because I miss it. She met his eyes. Are we clear? Yes, he said. Good, she said. She looked at the table. She looked at the diagram, revised now updated, with Farhan's information as Jake had relayed it during the layover. Let's go through it one more time, she said. They went through it one more time. Then they staged. The flight from Germany to the forward operating point took 4 hours and 50 minutes. They went wheels down at 3:42 in the morning local time, which gave them a window of approximately 4 hours before dawn. 4 hours was enough. It had to be. Farhan was waiting at the staging point. He was a small man compact with the specific quality of alertness that people in his profession needed to survive. He shook Jake's hand with the warmth of someone genuinely glad to see a specific person still breathing, and he looked at Emily with the careful assessment of someone meeting a new factor in an equation he had already been solving. Viper 1, he said. Emily looked at Jake. Jake shrugged slightly. He asked who he was working with. I told him. You know the call sign, Emily said to Farhan. Everyone who worked Eastern Kanar in 2017 knows the call sign, Farhan said. The operation that came out of there, the number of civilians who made it. He paused. You are a story we tell in certain circles. A good story. He looked at her steadily. I am glad the story is still breathing. Emily held his gaze. Adam Rahman, she said, tell me what you know. Farhan knew a great deal. He spoke for 11 minutes, and in those 11 minutes he produced more actionable intelligence than the satellite imagery and the surveillance timeline combined, because he had something neither of those things had. He had been there. He had eyes in that community. He had the specific knowledge of a man who understood the human terrain, the way Emily understood operational terrain as a living thing full of relationships and histories, and the particular patterns that people fell into when they were afraid or powerful or trying to hide something. The second location was a farmhouse 4 kilometers east of the original compound. It had been used by this particular group twice before, once in 2023, once earlier this year, for exactly this purpose. Reduced visibility, controlled access close enough to the border to create movement options if pressure came from the west. Farhan had 3 contacts within 2 kilometers of the farmhouse. He had it confirmed through one of them that Adam was there. That confirmation was 4 hours old. He had a second contact attempting to reconfirm as they spoke. He had done all of this before Jake's plane landed. Walker looked at Farhan with the expression of a man who recognized quality. How much are we paying you for this? Walker said. Nothing, Farhan said. Walker looked at him. Adam's school, Farhan said simply. 3 of my nephews attended. They have been attending for 2 years. He paused. This is not a job for me tonight. The table was quiet. Emily looked at Farhan. Thank you, she said. Let's get him back, Farhan said. The plan went through its final iteration. Emily made 2 adjustments based on Farhan's terrain knowledge. Jake caught a timing problem in the approach sequence and corrected it. Walker identified a contingency gap and they built around it. Ortega confirmed his contact's frequency was active. Briggs sat with the revised diagram and made 3 precise marks on it in pencil that he showed to Emily without explaining them, and she looked at them and nodded once. Communication was established with the air support element. 11-minute response window. The same. They planned around it the same way. At 4:51 in the morning, Emily Carter stood up from the table. She picked up the equipment that had been laid out for her. She had not touched a rifle in 6 years. She held it in her hands for a moment. Not dramatically, not ceremonially, just holding it the way you hold something that you know the weight of. Something that is familiar in the way that only things you have carried a very long time can be familiar. Jake was watching. She did not look at him. She checked the rifle with the automatic efficiency of deeply ingrained muscle memory function. Check. Sight alignment magazine, seated, and she slung it, and she was done. It took 9 seconds. Jake had never seen anyone do a function check in 9 seconds. He looked at Walker. Walker was watching Emily with an expression Jake had seen on very few faces in his life. It was the expression you wore when you were in the presence of something genuinely exceptional, and you were old enough to know how rarely that happened. "All right," Emily said. She looked at each of them. Jake, Walker, Ortega, Briggs, Farhan. "Remember what Adam doesn't know," she said. "He doesn't know anyone is coming. He's been held for 6 days. He is likely frightened, possibly injured, almost certainly running on very little sleep and very little food. When we reach him, the first thing that matters is not extraction speed." She paused. "The first thing that matters is that he is not more terrified by us than he already is by them. We talk to him. We go slow for 30 seconds. 30 seconds of calm can prevent 20 minutes of panic." 30 seconds, Jake repeated. 30 seconds, she confirmed. She looked at Farhan. "Lead us in," she said. He nodded. He turned toward the door. And Emily Carter, who was and always had been and would always be underneath everything, Emily Carter walked out into the darkness of a Kunar morning with a rifle on her back and 4 men at her side, and the weight of a 6-year-old promise that she had carried the entire distance from a battlefield to a bar in San Diego and was now finally almost ready to put down. Almost. But 30 seconds at a time. Farhan moved the way people moved when they had grown up, understanding that the ground beneath them had memory. Every step deliberate, every pause meaningful. He didn't need to explain what he was doing, because the people behind him were the kind of people who understood that silence was a language and movement was a sentence. And right now, in the 40 minutes before dawn in eastern Kunar province, every word needed to count. Emily was directly behind him. She moved the way she had always moved in the field. Not like someone who had been away for 6 years, not with the hesitation of someone relearning a skill, but with the deep automatic fluency of a thing that had never actually left. The body remembered. That was the thing nobody told you about training at that level. You could walk away from it. You could become someone else, someone quiet and careful and entirely civilian. But the body kept the record. Every movement pattern, every instinct, every piece of spatial awareness. It was all still there, waiting patient, like a language you thought you'd forgotten until someone spoke it directly to you. Jake was 3 steps behind her, and he was watching her move, and he was learning. Not consciously, not with the analytical part of his brain that processed tactical information. With the deeper part, the part that recognized excellence. The way you recognize music, not by analyzing it, but by feeling it, changed the quality of everything around it. Walker was to his left, and despite the bad knee, despite the 61 years, he moved with a quietness that Jake found almost unsettling. The man had 30 years of this in his body too. It showed. Ortega and Briggs were at the rear, and they communicated in the wordless shorthand of people who had done this enough times that the conversation happened before the need for it arose. Farhan raised his fist. Everyone stopped. Complete stillness, immediate. No hesitation, no shuffle, no readjustment. 6 people became 6 points of silence in the dark. Farhan listened for 11 seconds. Jake counted. Then Farhan lowered his fist and moved, and everyone moved with him. The farmhouse was 400 meters ahead. Emily knew this not because she could see it, but because Farhan's pace had changed in the specific way that pace changes when a destination becomes close enough to feel. She had learned to read that change 20 years ago from a man who had spent his entire life moving through terrain that wanted to kill him, and the lesson had never left her. She thought about what she'd said to Jake on the plane, about the work making sense in a way nothing else quite did. She had meant it completely. And right now, moving through the pre-dawn dark with her rifle across her back and 5 people around her who were entirely committed to the same thing she was committed to, she understood something she hadn't fully understood when she said it. The work made sense, but it wasn't the rifle that made it make sense. It was Adam. It had always been Adam. Even in the bar, even in 6 years of nursing shifts, even in the parking lot with the man in cardiac arrest and the coffee she was still holding when she started chest compressions, it had always been this specific thing. The person in front of you, the one who needed what you had, the 22-year-old who had built a school with children in it because a woman had put him on her back in the dark and told him to close his eyes and kept moving. That was the through line, not the rifle, not Viper 1, not the call sign, or the classified file, or the legend that had apparently circulated in certain circles for 6 years. The boy she carried, the man he became. Farhan stopped again. This time he turned back and looked at Emily directly. He held up 2 fingers. Then he pointed left. 2 guards, left side. She nodded. She looked at Walker. She made a small gesture, 2 fingers circling, pointing right. He understood. He tapped Briggs. Briggs understood. They moved right without sound. She looked at Jake. She pointed at him, then forward, then held up 1 finger. Stay forward, 1 direction. He nodded once. She looked at Ortega. She pointed at him, then at Farhan, then at the ground. Stay with Farhan, hold position. Ortega nodded. She moved left, alone. Jake watched her go and felt something tighten in his chest that was not fear exactly. It was something more specific than fear. It was the feeling of watching someone walk towards something enormous with total composure and understanding for the first time completely and without reservation what that composure actually cost. The next 4 minutes were the longest 4 minutes of Jake Reynolds' operational career. He stood forward and he listened and he could hear almost nothing. And that almost nothing was the thing that told him everything was going correctly, because the time to worry was when the silence broke. The silence held. Then Walker's voice came through the earpiece barely above a breath. Clear right side. Then Emily's voice. Same register. Clear left side. Then moving to entry, Jake moved forward. The farmhouse entry was a wooden door heavy older than anything around it. Emily was already at it. She looked at it for 2 seconds, the way she looked at things that needed to be solved completely immediately, with total focus on the specific properties of the problem. She looked at the hinges. She looked at the gap at the base. She looked at the latch. She turned the handle. The door opened. Jake stared at it. Unlocked, he said, barely audible. They didn't think anyone was coming, she said. Locked doors announced that something worth locking is inside. She went through first. The interior was dark and warm and smelled like dust and kerosene and the particular closed-air quality of a space that hadn't been opened in several hours. Emily moved through it the way she had moved through the approach, completely immediately with no wasted motion. She cleared the first room in 8 seconds. Jake cleared the left side. Walker, coming in behind them, took the right. A short hallway, 2 doors, one at the end, one on the right side. Emily stopped. She stood in the middle of the hallway and she was completely still and she was listening. From the door on the right, a sound. It was faint. It was the specific faint of something that was trying not to be heard. Not mechanical, human. The particular quality of a person trying to breathe quietly when quiet breathing is the difference between being found and not being found. Emily stepped to the door on the right. She did not kick it. She did not make a dramatic entry. She put her hand on it and she pushed it open slowly 3 inches, 6 inches 12, and she said one word in Pashto. One word that Farhan had given her 40 minutes ago, standing at the staging point as the final piece of the briefing. The word was Adam's mother's name. The sound stopped. A longer silence. Then from inside the room, in a voice that was young and frightened and had been frightened for 6 days and was trying very hard not to show it. Who's there, English? He had answered in English. Emily pushed the door fully open. She saw him. I was in the corner standing, which told her something important. He had not been physically restrained or had gotten free or had never been fully secured. which suggested they had been keeping him compliant through other means. He was thin in the way people got thin in 6 days without proper food. His eyes were wide and processing the door and her and the rifle on her back and Jake behind her, and all of it simultaneously with the rapid calculation of someone who had learned young that fast assessment was a survival skill. I was 22 years old. He had dark eyes and his mother's face, which she knew from one photograph she had carried in her memory for 6 years, a photograph that didn't exist anywhere official, just in the specific and indelible archive of things she had looked at in a moment of crisis and committed completely to herself. She looked at him, he looked at her. "My name is Emily," she said. Her voice was completely calm, completely level. The 30 seconds she had told Jake about. The 30 seconds of calm that prevented 20 minutes of panic. "We're here to take you home. You are safe. Nobody is going to hurt you. We need 30 seconds, okay? Just 30 seconds, and then we move." Adam looked at her. His breathing was fast. I was working through the information. The way frightened people work through information, slowly at first, then in a rush. "Emily," he said. "Yes," she said. Are you?" He stopped. Something moved across his face, something that was recognition trying to find its way through 6 years in a beard and civilian clothes in a context that was completely wrong. "You're the one who carried me. You're the soldier, the woman who you carried me out." Her throat tightened. She did not let it reach her voice. "That was a long time ago," she said. "Can you walk?" "Yes," he said immediately. "Yes, I can walk." "Good, we're going to walk out of here right now. Stay close to me. Don't run unless I tell you to run. If I tell you to get down, you get down immediately, no questions." "Understood." "Understood," he said. And he stood up straight the way someone stood when they had made a decision, and he looked at her with something in his eyes that was not just relief. It was the specific expression of a person looking at the living proof that something they had believed for a long time was actually true. He had believed she was alive. 6 years of being told she was gone, and he had believed she was alive. She could see that in his face, and it hit her somewhere that she had not expected to be hit. "Let's go," she said. They moved. The exit was exactly what it had been on entry, quiet, controlled, each person in their position. Farhan reading the ground ahead with the same careful fluency he had used on the approach. Adam moved well. He was frightened, but he was functional, and he followed Emily's movements with the focused attention of someone who had decided completely to trust the person in front of them and was applying every bit of their capability to that decision. They were 200 meters from the farmhouse when Ortega's voice came through the earpiece. "We have a vehicle, eastern approach, moving fast." Emily kept walking. "Distance," she said. 800 meters, Ortega said. "Closing. Speed of fast, not tactical, panicked. Not tactical, panicked." She processed that. A vehicle moving fast and panicked was not a patrol. A patrol moved with purpose. A vehicle moving fast and panicked was someone who had gotten a phone call. Someone had gotten a phone call. "Farhan," she said. "I hear it," he said. "Secondary route," she said. "Now." 2 minutes longer, he said. "I know, go." Farhan turned left. Everyone turned with him. Adam turned without being told, tracking Emily's movement automatically, which she noted, and filed as confirmation that he was doing well. Behind them, the vehicle's sound grew and then stopped. Stopped at the farmhouse. Voices, fast, sharp, the specific quality of people who had arrived expecting one thing and found something else. "They're in the farmhouse," Walker said. 30 seconds, Emily said. "Then they're behind us." "Do we run?" Jake said. "Not yet," she said. "Running creates sound. We move fast and we move quiet, and we give them 30 seconds to be confused before they figure out the direction." She was counting in her head. Jake was counting too. He could tell by the way she moved, not faster, but with a different quality of urgency, the kind that came from a deadline. 20 seconds. Behind them, voices louder. Someone shouting. The particular sharp edge of someone giving orders in anger. 30 seconds. "Now we run," Emily said. They ran. Adam ran beside her, and he was faster than she expected. 6 days of fear had not taken his legs, and he ran with the focused desperation of someone who had been waiting to run for 6 days and was now running with everything he had. Farhan was ahead, still in the lead, navigating the terrain from memory, at a pace that should not have been possible for a man his age, and was anyway, because the body remembered it, always remembered. Walker was keeping up. His bad knee was costing him. Jake could hear the slight irregularity in his stride, but he was keeping up. Briggs had moved to the rear, which was not discussed and did not need to be. Ortega was ahead, slightly right, angling toward the extraction point with the geometric precision of someone who had done this exact calculation. Moving elements, variable speed, converging point, enough times that it happened below conscious thought. Emily's earpiece crackled. They've identified the direction, Torres said from the support element. 2 vehicles now. They called 4 backup. How many? Emily said. She didn't break stride. Unknown. The contact lost audio. Air support, Emily said. Not a question. A statement of what was about to be needed. You're not calling it yet, Jake said, running beside her. We have 4 minutes to the extraction point, she said. Air support response is 11. We call it now. They arrive 3 minutes after we're all ready. Unless something goes wrong in the next 4 minutes, Jake said. Yes, she said, unless that. The vehicles were audible now, 2 of them moving fast, and they had the direction. Adam's breathing was controlled and fast, and he hadn't said a word since the farmhouse. He was running, and he was present, and he was... Emily noticed with something that was professional respect and something more personal remarkable. He was 22 years old, and he had been held for 6 days, and he was running through the dark in Kunar province, and he had not panicked once. His mother's son, she thought. She had never met his mother. She didn't need to. 2 minutes, Farhan said. The vehicles were close enough now that Emily could make the distinction between engine sounds, 2 different models, different power outputs, closing from the east and slightly south, which meant they had split to cover more of the terrain. Someone with the vehicles knew what they were doing. They split, Briggs said from the rear. He'd seen it before Emily said it. South vehicle is trying to cut the angle. Farhan, Emily said. I know, Farhan said. He adjusted left. Not dramatically, just enough. The south vehicle's engine sound began to angle away from them, not because it had lost them, because Farhan had put a fold in the terrain between the vehicle and their position. He knew the ground. He knew which way it rose and where it created dead space for sound and sight. He had grown up inside this specific geography, and it was to him exactly what it had been for Emily in the bar, a space that could be read and used by someone who knew how. 1 minute. Jake heard the extraction vehicle before he saw it. A sound, he recognized the particular engine note of a vehicle that had been sitting with its engine running, waiting, which was exactly what it had been doing. Hargrove was at the door. He saw Adam, and he did the rapid professional assessment that medical people did, automatically: eyes, posture, gait, visible injuries in approximately 2 seconds. In, Emily said. Adam got in. Walker got in, and he let himself sit heavily in a way that he had not allowed himself to do on the approach. And Jake heard the sound of it and understood exactly what the last 4 minutes had cost him. Ortega in, Briggs in. Farhan stopped at the door. Emily stopped. Come with us, she said. He shook his head. My people are here, he said. This is where I am. Farhan. Jake knows how to reach me, he said. He looked at Adam through the open door. He looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man who had taken a very large risk for a very clear reason and was satisfied that the reason had been worth it. Tell him the school is important, he said to Emily. Tell him to keep going. You can tell him yourself, she said. Another time, Farhan said. He stepped back. Go. She held his gaze for 1 moment. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. She got in. The door closed. The vehicle moved. Behind them, the 2 pursuit vehicles were converging on a point that was now empty, and they would figure that out in approximately 90 seconds. And by that time, the extraction vehicle would be far enough into the alternate route that it would not matter. Hargrove was already with Adam. Are you injured? Hargrove said. No, Adam said. I don't think so. My ribs are... I was pushed down a few times. I don't think anything is broken. I'm going to check, Hargrove said. Just breathing for now. Nice deep breath. Adam breathed. Good, Hargrove said. Again? Emily was in the front. She was looking ahead. She was still operational, still processing, still running the calculations of a situation that was not yet fully resolved. The pursuit vehicles, the response time, the route, the contingencies. Jake was beside her. He was looking at the road ahead too. But after 2 minutes, when the sounds behind them had fully diminished and the extraction route had opened up into the kind of clear distance That meant they were functionally safe. Jake let out a breath, just one breath, long and slow and completely involuntary. Emily heard it. She didn't say anything. She let out her own breath 3 seconds later, the same quality, the same involuntary honesty. From the back of the vehicle, Hargrove said, "Mild bruising, possible hairline on the sixth rib. Nothing structural. He needs food and water and sleep in that order." He paused. "He's going to be fine." Walker said from his position against the side wall where he had been sitting very still, "Good." His voice was rough, just slightly, just enough. Adam said from the back into a moment of relative quiet, "Is someone going to tell me what just happened?" Ortega said, "We got you out." "I understand that part," Adam said. "I mean, who are you people? How did anyone know where I was?" Silence for a moment, then Jake said, "She knew." Adam looked at Emily's back, at the woman in the front seat who was watching the road with the focused attention of someone still working. "Emily," he said. She turned. She looked at him over her shoulder. I was 22 years old and he had dark eyes and he had spent 6 days being afraid, and he was looking at her with an expression that she recognized from a long time ago. The same expression from a different face younger in the dark on her back while she told him to close his eyes. The expression of someone who had decided completely to trust her. "You really came back," he said. "Yes," she said. "You came back for me," he said. "Yes," she said again. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've been trying to find you. For a year, I hired someone to look. They said you were gone. They said the records showed." "I know what the records show," she said. "But you're here," he said. "I'm here," she said. He looked at her. The vehicle moved through the early morning dark, and the distance between them and the farmhouse grew. And Adam Rahman, who had been 8 years old and terrified on the back of a soldier in the dark, and was now 22, and had built a school with that terror, somewhere in the foundation of it, somewhere in the fact that someone had come back for him when they had absolutely no obligation to, Adam looked at Emily Carter and said the thing he had been trying to say for a year. "Thank you," he said, "for the first time, and for this time." Emily looked at him. She didn't say "you're welcome." That wasn't the right thing, and she knew it. Your welcome was for things that cost you nothing. This was not that. She said, "You built a school." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Tell me about it," she said. And in the back of a vehicle moving through the pre-dawn dark of eastern Afghanistan, with Walker resting his bad knee against the wall, and Ortega watching the road behind them, and Briggs doing what Briggs did, which was being quietly excellent, and Hargrove checking Adam's ribs with professional thoroughness, and Jake Reynolds sitting forward with his elbows on his knees, listening to everything Adam Rahman told Emily Carter about his school. He talked about it for 23 minutes. He talked about the building, which had been a storage facility, that he and 6 other young men had repaired by hand over 4 months. He talked about the first students, who were 11 children ranging from age 6 to age 14, and how 3 of them had never held a pencil before, and how that had been the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen in his life, watching a person hold a pencil for the first time. He talked about the funding, which had been inconsistent and difficult, and had required a level of bureaucratic persistence that he described with a self-deprecating humor that made Ortega laugh in the honest way. He talked about the teachers, 2 of them, both women, both from the community, both of whom had taken a professional and personal risk to stand in front of children and say that learning was worth the risk. He talked about the children. He talked about them by name, all 41 of them. Jake watched Emily listen. He had seen her face do many things tonight. He had seen it compose itself and focus and calculate and hold things in that wanted to come out. He had seen it almost smile and then actually smile. He had seen it go completely still in the storage room when she let herself be afraid for exactly the time she needed to be afraid. He had not seen it do what it did while Adam talked about his 41 students. It was not a dramatic expression. It was very quiet. It was the expression of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just been shown in specific and undeniable detail that the weight was worth it. Not that the loss was okay, not that the mission had been clean or the cost fair or the price proportionate. None of that, just that the weight was worth it. There was a difference. When Adam finished, the vehicle was quiet for a moment. Then Walker said from his position against the wall, 41. 41, Adam confirmed. Next year, Walker said. We're expanding, Adam said. If. He stopped. He looked down at his hands. If I can get back. You'll get back, Emily said. He looked at her. The people who took me, he started, are being dealt with, Hayes said from the communication link that had been open and quiet for the past 20 minutes. His voice came through the vehicle speaker with the slight distortion of a long-distance connection. The operation tonight has been transmitted. There are additional elements moving on both locations as we speak. Hadar's capacity in eastern Kunar will be significantly reduced within 36 hours. Adam processed that. Because of tonight, he said. Because of tonight, Hayes confirmed. Adam was quiet. Because of her, he said. Nobody corrected him because nobody disagreed. They reached the airfield at 5:47 in the morning. The sky was the specific gray-purple of the 20 minutes before sunrise, and the air was cold in the way that high-altitude mornings were cold regardless of the season, and Emily stepped out of the vehicle and stood in it for a moment and breathed it in. Jake stepped out beside her. He stood with her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Jake said, "What happens now for you when we get back?" She looked at the lightning sky. "I go back to work," she said. "The hospital," he said. "The hospital," she confirmed. "Just like that," he said. "Just like that," she said. And her voice was not flat when she said it. It was not diminished or resigned or closing something down. It was settled, the specific quality of a person who knows exactly where they are and has chosen to be there. "That's my work, Jake. That's the work I chose. Tonight was," she paused. "Tonight was a promise I made to an 8-year-old boy that I needed to keep. But tomorrow morning there will be someone in Bay 4 who needs me to know how to read a person in 30 seconds and make a decision that determines whether they go home." She looked at him. "That matters." "I know it matters," he said. "I'm not going back to this," she said, not harshly, just clearly. "I need you to understand that." "I understand," he said. She looked at him. "You're a good operator," she said. "You led with your ego tonight, and then you put it down. That's harder than most people realize. Don't stop doing that." He held her gaze. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She almost smiled. "Don't call me ma'am," she said. "Emily," he said. "Better," she said. Walker came to stand beside them. He moved more slowly than he had 6 hours ago, and he was not hiding it the way he had been hiding it before, which Emily took as a sign of something trust maybe, or simply the particular relaxation that came after an operation concluded, and the maintenance of performance was no longer required. "Your knee," she said. "It'll be fine," he said. "Hargrove should look at it." Hargrove is currently feeding Adam a protein bar and explaining in detail why he should eat it slowly. "Slowly," Walker said. "I'll wait." They stood together for a moment. The sky continued to lighten. "Master Chief," Emily said. "Retired," he said, and there was something in his voice when he said it this time. Not the same quality as the bar, lighter, like the word had shifted slightly in meaning between then and now. "Retired," she agreed. She paused. "Thank you for standing up. In the bar, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he said simply. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I suppose you did." The flight home was quieter than the flight out. People slept, really slept, the deep, necessary sleep of people whose bodies had spent a night demanding things of them and were now collecting the debt. Walker slept immediately. Briggs slept. Ortega was out within 10 minutes. Adam slept between Hargrove and Jake, and he slept the way people slept when they had been afraid for a long time and were finally not afraid, completely, heavily, without moving, like a person returning to something fundamental. Emily did not sleep on the way back. She sat and she looked at her hands and she thought about the school, about 41 children, about 3 of Farhan's nephews in the rows, about the 2 women who had stood up in front of those children and said learning was worth the risk. She thought about Bay 4, about the person who would be there tomorrow morning, whoever they were, whatever had happened to them, the 30 seconds of assessment she would do before anyone else had processed the situation. The decision that would matter. She thought about Marcus Webb in Colorado training rescue dogs, and she thought she might call him when she got back. Not to talk about the mission, just to talk. She thought about Sal and the coffee that would be there when she got back, and the way he had nodded at each of them at the door, with the specific nod of a man who understood what was happening and respected it completely. She thought about Jake saying wrong place for someone like you. She thought about how wrong he had been. And she thought about how, in the specific way that people were wrong about things that turned out to matter. His being wrong had led directly to the only possible chain of events that would have found her here on this plane, coming back from a province she had left 6 years ago, having kept a promise she had been carrying the whole time. Wrong place, she almost smiled. Then she did smile. Small, real, the same one from the bar. Jake, who was awake and watching the ceiling, caught it. I didn't say anything. He just let it be there. They landed in San Diego at 6:23 in the morning local time. The sun was already up, already doing what the San Diego sun did, which was arriving with complete confidence and filling everything with a light that was entirely indifferent to what had happened the night before and utterly beautiful because of it. Hayes was there at the airfield. He shook hands with Walker, with Ortega, with Briggs. He said things to each of them that were quiet and specific and clearly meant. He looked at Jake and he said, "Good work, Lieutenant." And the way he said it communicated that he understood exactly what Jake had put on the table tonight without being asked, and that it was noted and would remain noted. He came to Emily last. He stood in front of her and he looked at her, and there was nothing of the military commander in his face right then. There was just a man who had asked an enormous thing of another person and understood the weight of having asked it. "Thank you," he said. "Don't," she said, "Emily. Don't thank me and don't make this into something it needs to be reported as," she said quietly. "It was a private matter. I had a promise to keep. I kept it." She paused. "That's all." He looked at her for a long moment. "The file," he said. She looked at him. "Viper 1, he said. "The status listed." "Leave it," she said. "Leave the file as it is." He was quiet. "Emily," he said. "I'm Emily Carter," she said. "I'm an ER nurse. I work at San Diego Harbor Medical Center. That is what I am, and that is what I'll be tomorrow and the day after that." She held his gaze. "The file can say whatever it says. It doesn't change what I do on Monday morning." Hayes pressed his lips together. Then he nodded. "The file stays," he said. "Thank you," she said. Adam was the last one off the plane. He came down and he stood in the San Diego morning, and he looked at the sky for a long moment, the way people looked at things they had been afraid they would never see again. The open sky, the light, the specific, ordinary, extraordinary fact of being somewhere safe. He looked at Emily. She looked at him. "The school," she said, "when you go back." "When I go back," he said, "send me a photograph," she said, "of the students, all 41. He looked at her. "I don't have your address," he said. She looked at Jake. Jake had already taken out his phone. He pulled up a contact and he held it out to Adam. Adam looked at it. He looked at Emily. "You'll actually be there," he said. "At this number?" "I'll be at work," she said. "But yes, I'll be there." He put the number in his phone. He stood in front of her, and he was 22 years old, and he had 41 students, and he had his whole life in front of him, and he had been carried out of the dark by someone who had no obligation to carry him, and had done it anyway, and then had come back through the dark to find him again. And he looked at her with everything that was in that and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would fit. She held out her hand. He took it. He held it for a moment. Then he said, "My mother used to say that the people who show up when they don't have to, those are the only ones you can trust completely." Emily held his gaze. "Your mother was right," she said. He nodded. He let go of her hand. He turned and walked toward the vehicle that Hayes had arranged to take him to the embassy for processing, and Emily watched him go, and she stood in the San Diego morning with the sun on her face and her hospital badge still in her jacket pocket and a rifle she had already returned to the logistics team and would not be picking up again. Jake stood beside her. They watched the vehicle until it turned out of sight. Then Jake said, "What do you do now, right now, today?" She reached into her jacket pocket. She pulled out her hospital badge. She looked at it. Emily Carter, RN. She clipped it back onto her pocket in the same place it had been all night. "I go home," she said. "I sleep for 5 hours, and then I go to work." Jake looked at her. She looked at him. "Take care of yourself, Jake," she said. "You too," he said. She walked to her car. She drove back to the city that had been her city for 4 years, through streets that were just beginning to fill with Saturday morning, and coffee runs and people walking dogs, and the whole wide ordinary miracle of a day that had not been through what her night had been through and was beautiful because of it and not despite it. She parked. She went inside. She sat at her kitchen table for a moment in the quiet. She thought about Adam. She thought about 41 children who had been told by a 22-year-old man who had once been carried through the dark on the back of a soldier that learning was worth the risk. She thought about everything that had to happen for that to be true. All of it, every piece of it. The mission that went wrong, the team she lost, the months in Germany, the apartment in Portland, the nursing school, the 14-hour shifts, the parking lot with the cardiac arrest, the bar on Friday night, the beer spill on her sleeve, the man who grabbed her arm and said, "Wrong place for someone like you." All of it. Every piece of it had led to the vehicle in the pre-dawn dark, in Adam saying thank you and meaning it the way you only meant it when the thing being thanked for was not a small thing. She sat with that. Then she went to sleep. 5 hours later, her alarm went off. She got up. She put on her scrubs. She clipped her badge to her pocket. And Emily Carter, who was and had always been and would always be exactly who she chose to be, which was the most dangerous and the most courageous and the most honest thing any person could ever be, walked out the door and went to work. Because some people carried rifles, and some people carried the weight of what rifles left behind. And the ones who understood, both the ones who had lived on both sides of that line and chosen with full knowledge of the cost which side to stand on, those were the ones who changed the shape of the world. Not loudly, not with call signs or classified files or bars full of people who finally understood what they were looking at. Quietly, one person at a time, one shift at a time, one promise kept at a time. Viper One had never needed the world to know her name. She only ever needed to know it herself.